So the idea was Philippe and Margot and I, we're the three co-editors, we come from different disciplines and different backgrounds. So we sent out some calls to people we knew and also more widely into the community, soliciting ideas and proposals for short chapters on memory, and we were totally surprised by what we found.
I chose the topic of forgetting because I really believe that all human action to some degree is born of forgetting. We actually need forgetting to survive. If we were always thinking about all the times we'd been hurt, everything that had ever been done for us, we'd be paralyzed, in fact. There's times where we have to forget in order to move forward. And I thought, how can we think about the current Me Too movement and the process of reconciliation as well in that light, in the way in which we need forgetting somehow to survive. And so my chapter kind of takes memory and unpacks it and asks from a different way how we could think about memory in a more problematic way and not always just hold memory up as without any tarnish. Memory can also be difficult.
What I really wrote about was the fluidity of memory and our haunting capacity to forget. The way human beings are able to adapt to almost any degree of environmental degradation. Years ago, I was in Haiti, a country that as recently as the 1920s was 80% forested with one of the richest dryland forests in the Antilles. Today, the forest covers about 2%. And I was out on a ridge with a voodoo priest, a friend of mine, and he began to kind of wax eloquent about the beauty of this landscape, but that to me was a sort of half-hearted forest, a sort of leprous growth of scandent vegetation. And I could only think of locusts, he could only think of angels. I was perhaps more biologically or ecologically accurate. He perhaps did more for the human spirit, but it reminded me of this amazing ability of our species to adapt to any degree of environmental degradation. And that was probably a strongly useful adaptive trait in the early years of our evolution as a social species, but now it's something that we indulge very much to our detriment.
So in the memory collection, my essay is actually about anthems. And I tried to reconstruct the anthems solely from memory, from the places that I was born or lived or worked or returned to. And I was asking, how long does patriotic information last in our minds? And yeah, I discovered that in fact it lasts a really, really long time. Anthems from childhood are still recalled, 30-something years later. When we think about memory, we think about personal memory, experiences that we recollect over years and accumulate. But there's also a kind of like public and social or cultural memory that's transmitted to us and that we retain as well. And so I wanted to explore that more kind of objective side of memory rather than the personal and subjective side.
The chapter I wrote in the memory book is titled Constructed Futures. And it deals with the relationship between how we think about the past and how we think about the future. Most people think about the past as something that's written in stone or a bunch of books that have been filed in a library that we're free to go and check whenever we feel like looking up something. But of course we know now that the past is much more than that, and it's a lot more flexible than any library you could imagine. My interest in the topic is really stems from the fact that I feel that people are much less aware of how much our thinking about the future can become constrained in a similar way than our thinking about the past can become constrained.
Okay, my chapter is about fish. In fact, it's called A Fish's Story. My interest in fish is long-standing professionally, but I'm particularly interested in the animal migration side of memory and how animals perform vast migrations over many thousands of kilometers without necessarily having a memory. Pacific salmon are a marvelous example of memory in that they will leave their native stream or river or lake, migrate to the Pacific Ocean where they will stay for a couple of years, and then somehow they'll make the way back. Pacific salmon die when they've spawned, and so they will never do that spawning migration again.
Well, there's an obvious reason, and then I guess there's a more subtle reason as well. The obvious reason is that November 11th is the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, of armistice. And so there will be much remembering and commemoration happening. And if Philippe came up with the idea that let's think more generally about memory. So it makes a lot of sense to explore the role that memory plays in society, given that this November we'll be doing a lot of remembering about the First World War and about the effects that the First World War had on the world. We had an eye to who were authors, what sorts of perspectives from their own experiences they would bring to the collection, but also the kinds of things they could write about. So we have not only people from different areas of life with different experiences of being present on the territory of Canada, but we also have people who have studied vastly different areas of knowledge, and from each of those layered dimensions, you see a picture of the really profound significance of memory emerge.